In this video, we're going to answer the question, how much can an Uber driver realistically earn in the UK? So let's start by looking at an imaginary maximum. What is the most that you could ever imagine an Uber driver earning? So we're going to assume £18 an hour. This is an inflated number. In practice, people are not earning that much. Uber's going to take a cut, and in reality, you're just not going to earn £18 an hour. We're going to assume zero expenses. So you got free fuel, free car insurance, everything's free. It's all wonderful. You're paying absolutely no tax. You're driving in London, so you're getting the highest rates, and you are working 52 weeks per year and you're never taking a break. What would your income look like? Well, it doesn't look too bad. So your annual income working only 20 hours a week would get you 18,720. That's livable unless you're living in central London, for example. 30 hours a week, you're starting to get a half decent income, 28,000. 40 hours, you've got a fairly okay income for driving, 37,500 roughly. 60 hours a week, suddenly earn 56,000, which sounds pretty good. So if we look at this in terms of averages of jobs that tend to earn that, so hairdressers on average, somewhere around that would be what they could realistically earn, apart if you exclude the very top end and the very, very bottom end. You could say an HGV driver probably would expect an income somewhere around that with a little bit of experience. Teacher with some experience could quite happily be on 37,000. And then a London Underground driver, perhaps at 56,000, representing quite a high end in driving careers. So these numbers look quite good. However, this is based on a quite ridiculous rate. A more realistic rate is to say £12 per hour, but we're still in our magic land where there's zero expenses. And let's now look at how the numbers look with a more realistic £12 per hour that takes into account Uber's 25% cut and some waiting around with no work. So it starts to look more like this. So the 20 hours, you're starting to look at, perhaps waiting tables, not even full time. Again, 30 hours starting to move down to hairdresser sort of income on average. Low end of an HGV driver, if you're working 40 hours a week, and a teacher is the absolute maximum income that you could realistically expect. So suddenly, when we drop the hourly rate to something more reasonable, your total income isn't looking quite as exciting. There is another problem, which is that unfortunately Uber doesn't give you a car. You're not driving one of their cars. You have to put up all the money and spend everything that you need to spend out of your own pocket. You're basically investing in your own business. You're not an employee of the company. So you've got various options. You can lease it, and we'll look at how the finances look with a typical lease on a Prius. You could finance it, so you're borrowing money with the aim of purchasing a car, so you're buying it through a finance company, or you can buy it outright, which will give you the most return. So leasing costs the least, but will take a biggest impact on your income. Buying requires the highest investment, but will leave you with the most money. So we're going to look at all those different scenarios. So let's take the numbers straight from Uber's website. Remember, you can't just go and look up lease prices for cars that normal people would drive to or from work, because these leases are not designed for very high mileage commercial use. You have to go to someone more specialist. So Uber is quoting about £235 per week for a relatively new Prius. Prius is quite a good choice because they have very low running costs and very high mileages and low expenses in maintaining. So that's why a lot of people like those. So we're using our numbers from the previous section based on the £12 per hour, and we're calculating 52 times 235. Even if you're not working, you're still going to have to pay the lease. And so the numbers are a lot less exciting. Working 20 hours a week, you're barely scraping by with £260 having worked 20 hours for 52 weeks, which is pretty terrible. 30 hours, you're starting to scrape out a profit that really you can't live on that very well. 40 hours, you're scraping by, and 60 hours, you've got an income that is plausible. You see how leasing a car has just wiped out almost all of the income and meant that working a small number of hours just isn't going to make this business work. The other costs are also worth taking into account, which is the insurance. Realistically, you're going to look at a big price for insurance because you're going to be doing a lot of miles and you're paying passengers, and you're likely driving in inner cities. So insurance companies are going to charge a fair bit. A rough number, you're going to be talking around 1,300. You're going to have to spend on a mobile phone. You may wish to have a personal mobile phone, or you can get one through a plan that Uber provides for £5 a week. You've got miscellaneous expenses. So that's just everything. For example, you might have to pay parking fines, parking fees, washing the car, accountants, because you're self-employed, I'm just going to estimate that as £520 for everything else that you can imagine. Then you've got a private hire license. You're talking at least £200 annualized for that license. And then when we add those to the lease payments, we're coming up with about 14,500 of fixed costs per year. Remember, this is a business. This isn't working for someone else. You have to actually pay expenses out of your own pocket. And suddenly working 20 hours a week, you're losing money. You're working 30 hours a week, scraping out a tiny profit. 40 hours a week, it's not really much to live on. And 60 hours a week, you're starting to get a half decent, vaguely livable income. So then we have to take it to fuel, because so far we've assumed that fuel is actually free. And it's very difficult to calculate this exactly. I'm taking a more realistic example for a typical car. So you're looking at a typical car you should be using for Uber. So say 60 miles per gallon, hourly mileage of say 8 miles each hour. Remember, you're going to be driving around in circles quite a lot. We're saying 520 a gallon. And by doing some calculations, you come to 0.7 pounds per hour. This is for a more typical vehicle that could be used for Uber. A Prius is probably going to come a lot lower than that, maybe 0.5. And in this more realistic scenario of fuel, you're starting to actually be losing money working 20 hours a week, vaguely making a tiny bit of money at 30 hours a week. 40 hours, really living on £9,000 a year is going to be very difficult. 60 hours a week, and you've got half decent, vague income that you could perhaps live on. So a car and finance, the numbers look a bit better. So I've looked at an Uber specialist that does plans for people doing Uber, and they were quoting £150 a week at the low end for a decent car. I think that was a Ford Focus, fairly new, and that's with no balloon payments. You don't have to pay £10,000 to actually take ownership. This is paying £150 a week, but you're actually going to own it. And you can see that if you're going to work the higher end of the number of hours, that you're going to be making a living. And so it is possible to make a living on Uber with a car on finance. The real bottom line is, to make Uber sort of work half decent, you're going to have to buy a car up front. That's going to be the cheapest way. So if we say you invest £10,000 in buying a car, we'll say that there's a 5-year depreciation and it's worthless at the end of 5 years. So that's £2,000 a year you have to expense. So don't just look at the top line. Remember, if you're buying a car for Uber, it's going to be going down in value every year. You're going to be losing some of your investment. And to continue with the business, you're eventually going to have to replace it. So that has to be taken into account. To be successful in Uber, you've got to work a lot of hours. You just can't do it 10 hours a week. The expenses will just swamp any income. So I would say that working 40 hours per week with an owned car, you're probably going to have a basic standard of living. You're probably not going to want to live in central London. You're going to commute if you're going to work there. And I would say that working 60 to 80 hours a week, depending on demand, there's always constantly more and more and more people joining. That's diluting the pool. And buying your car up front, if you're going to work really, 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 really hard and invest to buy the whole thing up front, you're basically buying a job with your own money, then the best scenario is you could probably scrape out 30,000 a year. So hopefully this video has been very helpful to you, and you've got a more realistic view on Uber's income. And finally, thank you very much for watching.